Hi, everybody. Hello. I'm feeling very lonely up the front here, so I'm going to encourage you, much like other people have. For those of you who are at the back of the room, please do fill up the tables near at the front of the room. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much, madam. Really appreciate it. Follow their lead. They're amazing people. Love your work. It's that awkward silence, right? I mean it. I really do want you to walk to the forward. Oh, okay, that's good enough. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for coming along to our session. I think it's going to be brilliant. So, and that's not down to me, it's down to all these folks here. So you're here to hear about business and brands, collaborators or competitors. The little brief that we were given is to explore the role, position and expertise of business in the nature sector, which we believe is changing. So we're going to ask questions and hear the thoughts of the panelists around how we can most effectively work together, business and the nature sector, to engage new and diverse audiences, and to explore whether or not, if we're not collaborating, are we competing for that audience attention? So those are the types of topics that we're going to be discussing. I've got a range of questions that I'm going to pose to the panel, but throughout all of this, I really want you to be able to think of the questions that you want to pose to the panel as well. We've got 45 minutes together today. I'm hoping that we can engineer a bit of a conversation that's going to last around half an hour, and then I'm going to invite all of the rest of you to join in for the last 15 minutes, including the folks, I don't know where the camera is, but all of you who's online, all of you who are online, I don't know where I'm pointing at, but you're there, to pose questions as well. I'm going to take questions in the order of online, woman, man, online, woman, man. Thank you very much. Let's do some introductions to start with, and if I invite Alex down the end to start.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex from Hubbub. We're an environmental charity. We're all about inspiring action that's good for the environment and everyone. And that means we run projects that make it both desirable and possible for people to take action in their everyday lives. We use those projects to tell brilliant stories, and we use those stories to influence people in business and government to drive change faster. That might look like campaigns to make you or encourage you to eat your pumpkin at Halloween, all the way through to working with communities to develop green space that I'm sure we'll talk about. And we work with everyone from big brands to councils to community groups.
Thanks very much, Alex. Claire?
My name's Clare Freshwater-Turner. I work for Lloyds Banking Group, and I work in quite a new team in the bank, the nature team. And I was saying we're trying to be the voice for nature in the bank, and I'll tell you a bit about what we're doing later on.
Wendy.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Wendy Darke, the CEO of True to Nature, a Bristol-based production company that makes wildlife and adventure travel films. Our strapline is great storytelling that builds lifelong relationships between people and nature, so I'm definitely in the right place. And prior to that, I spent 25 years at the BBC Natural History Unit, culminating in the last 4 as the head of the Natural History Unit. Projects such as Planet Earth 2, Blue Planet with David Attenborough, and the like. And then I also did a PhD on corals of the Barrier Reef, so I have a PhD in marine science.
Fantastic. I don't remember hearing that when we first met between each other. That's amazing. And to finish off, my name's David Cope. I'm here today in the guise of a trustee of the John Lewis Partnership Foundation and the chairperson of their Nature Fund Committee. Just a little plug for us. We're a small grant-giving charity. We are about to launch a funding round, so if anybody is interested in applying for funds from the John Lewis Partnership Nature Fund, do look us out. We're on LinkedIn, look out our website as well. The fund is we're meeting next Monday to work out exactly what we're going to fund, what the scope is, but we're likely to be funding work that's going to support access to skills and jobs within the nature sector for marginalised or people from marginalised communities, possibly with a particular focus on LGBTQIA plus individuals. So if you know of any projects that might benefit from that type of fund, then do keep your eyes peeled on our LinkedIn and on our website. corporate little adverts over. I'm going to pose my first question. I'm going to go down to Alex, if it's okay. So really interested in your thoughts, Alex, on how far you believe brands can lean into communicating about their actions on nature before they, I don't know, fall over, fall flat on their face, potentially through accusations of greenwashing, etc. So how far can they get into this space?
It depends how much action they've taken, right? I always think that communication is something that you need to think about before you act, but you need to be doing it after you've got action to show, and your communication needs to be proportionate to the action you've taken. Like you see egregious examples sometimes of someone spending 50 grand on a project and 500 grand advertising it. That's where you get into dangerous greenwashing territory. And I think we haven't seen a huge amount of examples of like really impressive, bold action in this space from brands. It feels like really early days, and maybe we'll get into why that is in this panel. I think that would be quite interesting. You mentioned to me earlier, so for examples of like a good example and perhaps a controversial one. So just speaking from my own experience, something that we're working on that I think is appropriate is we do something called the Nature Hubs Fund at Hubbub, and that's in partnership with Starbucks. And we've funded community-led green spaces all around the UK to make improvements to their green space. And we're about to fund about 60 more plus continuation funding for some of the early ones to keep going and keep improving. And I think it's a really good project, but also our partner Starbucks, they don't actually want to communicate it like in a major national way, because the thing that's aligned with their business or their business roots is that like it's a shared space in a community. So they only are really doing local communication about the projects. It's like, and they're not doing huge communication because this is a project that's hundreds of thousands and not millions of pounds. So that needs to be appropriate. Otherwise you look like you're taking too much credit for something that in the great scheme of things is relatively modest. Having said that, if you keep doing that for years and years and years, you start building networks at really substantial scale. I think that's the only way you can do it. The controversial example, so I came up with Brewdog's Lost Forest as my controversial example, which I think lived up to its name a little bit more than they perhaps anticipated. And I don't know how many people know about this, but Brewdog bought some land in Scotland and planted 500,000 trees, and half of them died within the first year. And I think the issues around that, it's not so much that they did a really ambitious project that didn't work as well as they anticipated, because like, first of all, credit for ambition. Secondly, we've all done projects that have failed. I think it's when you position yourself as the savior and you make a huge noise about something, then that's really risky for a brand, because it can come back to bite you if it doesn't work, and people aren't out there rooting for you to succeed. And I also think that it's dangerous if you position yourself as a brand to lead a project. And so I think some of the lessons for that is as a brand, it's really important to not be the lead partner on a project, but instead you should be partnering with credible organizations who really know the space, know the role that you should play as a brand in terms of funding and amplifying the work, and make sure that the work you do then is proportionate to the impact you're having and to the funding that you're putting in.
Thank you. And if you don't mind the follow-up question, sorry. So you mentioned about risk-taking there, and that sort of brought to mind another phrase that I'm sure many of you have heard about, green hushing. So corporates now sort of receding from talking about the actions that they are taking. And I just wondered, do you feel that that's a sort of a growing, growing issue that maybe is coming to the fore because of those types of examples of where a company has tried to do something big and bold and has failed?
So I think green hushing is very real. I don't know whether it's quite so much about the other initiatives that have failed, as a lot of people are just playing catch up with new legislation, new reporting requirements, and particularly like the Advertising Standards Authority, for example. It's much more stringent rules about what you can and can't say in public. We ran a plant milks campaign earlier this year, trying to get people to try plant milk to replace dairy. It was so interesting looking at what the Advertising Standards Authority would let us put on the poster, because you can't say it's more sustainable, it's more environmentally friendly. We ended up saying something like oat, soy, and coconut milk produce at least 78% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than dairy or something. It's not snappy, is it? It's like really hard to communicate, but if you have to communicate accurately in order to comply with regulations, which is a good thing, it's a huge communications challenge to be really accurate and specific, but also simple and compelling. And all of these big brands, like, we can do that because we kind of sit in a room going, oh my God, wow, let's try 30 versions and we'll see what we think works, and we'll talk to the ASA and we'll work it out. If you're a big brand and you've got huge teams focused on risk and legal teams and so on, it's kind of easier not to do stuff. And I think it will come, but they are just more risk averse. So yeah, I think green hush is real, but it's less about failing and it's more about complying.
Thank you very much. If anybody has questions that sort of puts into their mind, do note them down. We're going to come to questions a bit later, so pose them away to Alex later. Clare, I'm going to move on and invite you just to sort of explain a little bit more about what you and your team does, but particularly through the lens of, I'm just thinking sort of why a Lloyds customer might care what Lloyds Banking Group is doing about nature.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very good question, and a very good question when I first got this job and my children asked me what I did, and I said I work in a nature team, and they said, well, what is a nature team in a bank? How does that even work? What is that for? So it is a good question, but actually nature is really important to us, as it is to every business, and it's important to our customers and our clients. We touch on nature in our own operations, but that's probably a much smaller amount, but actually we touch a lot on nature in terms of the investments we make. That's sort of the bigger part of it. So possibly not so much through, it does impact obviously our current account customers and mortgage customers, but we're talking more about larger clients as well, because nature is important to them. We finance a huge amount of farmers in the UK, and as you can imagine, nature they rely on it, and that's a huge dependency for them, and therefore it's really important that we talk to them more about it as well, which I'll cover in a minute. But we set up a nature team, I think it's about a year ago now, and we've been growing, which is great to see. We call it sort of, it's a fast follower to climate, really, nature, and we need to make sure that we upskill. And so some of the things that we're looking to do, some are more internally focused and some are more externally. So internally, really trying to build internal capability. We've been doing a lot of training for the board, but equally also for relationship managers who talk to our clients and customers, for branches, for everyone. In fact, we've just launched a really I was about to say really brilliant training program, but I wrote it, so I shouldn't say that. But anyway, something that I think is really good called Nature Uncovered, which hopefully everyone will really enjoy in the business, really to understand why nature is important, what our role is as a bank in that, and in general what we can do to help in that space. The other thing is to understand our exposure, so the impacts and dependencies on nature. I'm not going to go through all the details around TNFD and materiality assessments here, but a lot of work going into that and understanding what our impact and dependencies are, and working with our clients on that as well. But also looking at opportunities, and there's a few organisations we've been involved in. One of the things we're the first founding partner of Projects for Nature. I don't know if you've heard of that. And it's a donation-based model, so it's trying to link donors to projects, and it's something that Natural England and DEFRA and Accenture set up. Really brilliant projects that they pre-screened to make it easier for people to understand what the projects were, what they were going to deliver, and what their donation was ultimately going to be doing. And so we signed up to that last year. We are part of 3 projects. One's with the National Trust, one's with the Rivers Trust, and one's with Wheel to Waves, which is part of NEP. And these projects have been brilliant for us. Not only, obviously, we've donated to the projects, we've been able to go and visit the projects, and we've learned a lot, particularly around some of the areas that we're interested in, that we know our clients will be interested in, such as natural flood management. How do you finance that? How do you help farmers and bring them together so they can share ideas and understand how they can finance sustainable farming, regenerative farming, but also looking at use of the rest of their land, and then maybe they can access some other government funding to rewild or plant trees or whatever that might be. So lots of learnings for us that we can pass on to our clients. That's been really brilliant. Another organisation we've been working with quite a lot is the Soil Association. So that is very important for our farmers, and we've been offering a bespoke service for our farmers where the Soil Association will work with them to baseline their land. It's really important to understand, for us, as it is for the farmers, not only, location-based data is so important. Where are they based? What's the land look like? What's the soil quality like? What's the water quality? So lot of data gathering, but helping farmers not only gather that data. It's a very clever app that the Soil Association have, but also then look at what other financing mechanisms might be available to them as well. So hopefully that's helping our farmers in that space. And then lastly, the other organisation we work with is the Woodland Trust. And it's interesting because you were saying people don't shout about everything that they do, and it depends what the projects are. I think we do talk quite a lot about the tree planting that we do with the Woodland Trust, but we do more with them as well. There's a lot more projects going on in the background. There's one that's called More Hedges, which is financing farmers so they can apply for the funding to plant woodland and hedges. And there's a variety of other things that we're doing, but I guess it's all about the scale, and a lot of things are very local, so it's kind of depending on how you want to talk about those. I think that's all I was going to say.
Cool. Thank you. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to ask a follow-up as well. In another guise, I work with landowners and therefore with farmers as well. So those examples you've given are really great. In one of the earlier sessions, somebody was talking about trusted voices and how that's really important in communicating. And I guess when you're working with a farmer as you're the bank, they owe you money that you've lent them, largely, I'd expect. So working with those intermediaries, such as the Soil Exchange, Soil Association, and the Woodland Trust, are those deliberate tactics to be able to work with trusted voices, independent intermediaries, if you like, to be able to engage them in ways that maybe you as a bank couldn't directly engage them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'd say our relationship managers obviously have got a very good hopefully have a very good relationship with all those farmers and really are on the ground and understand what's happening on the ground. But yes, it's about linking in with those organisations that, as you say, have got that trusted voice and can help bring people together.
Thank you very much, Claire. And again, just think of extra questions that you might want to ask Claire later. We're coming to questions from online and in the room in about 15 or 20 minutes. But I'm just going to come back down the sofas to Wendy. And Wendy, I'm interested in, we've got a really different set of perspectives on the panel here, but you're kind of professional nature communicator, aren't you? So I'm wondering what your view is in the process of making sort of incredible cinematic nature programs, sort of highlighting the weird and the wonderful from around the world. Is there a risk that we turn people away from nature here in the UK?
Sure. I think it's an interesting dilemma. I think I'm very mindful that a first position is to engage people with nature, often through the heart as well as the mind, in terms of creating that sense of awe and wonder and spectacle. It's often the first kind of introduction that many people will have via the television, and like you say, it can often be in the most amazing exotic places. So I still think there's an absolute place for that, particularly because people are watching on so many different platforms now as well. That said, I think any one of us, and that's all of us here working in wanting to be a voice for nature, it's not lost on us just the challenges for nature, both here in the UK and the wider world. And so as responsible communicators, it's really important that we think both as program makers, how best can we continue to kind of engage audiences that might not see nature as something they're connected with or value. So there's definitely an aspiration, there's a part to be played there, but crucially, we want to get the relevant stories across right here, right now, that start to make a tangible difference on the ground to bring about material, positive impacts for nature and then ultimately ourselves. And so, just as an example, a project I've been we made at True to Nature, or two actually, we've a 4-part series on sharks with Steve Backshall, followed by a 4-part series on whales with Steve Backshall. And the approach we took right at the get-go with those 4 big projects, 4 1-hours, one of them was absolutely dedicated to sharks of the UK, and in Wales, whales of the UK as well. So it was great working with Sky that we could get them on board from the get-go to say it is as important for audiences here to just see the story of whales and sharks literally cruising up and down the waters of the UK. And we got them on board with that, while simultaneously filming with local crews around the world as well, to give you that bigger picture perspective. But significantly, in terms of the approach we took, traditionally a lot of wildlife films, and some today, would tend to just kind of give you that perspective of the animal in almost like a surreal world, or, it looks so beautiful. Whereas the approach we took with all of those is to have a blended approach. So you still get amazing sharks or whales in all their magnificent glory, about a third. Then obviously somebody like Steve Backshall, who is an authentic voice, he knows his wildlife as well as anybody, and crucially has that ability, particularly with sharks and whales, to free dive and to be alongside them without kind of having bubbles and all the rest to disrupt them in their world. That gives you that proximity, getting you closer. But the bit I'm so proud of in all of these shows is that from the get-go, conservation narratives are weaved right from the get-go, and they're often driving the primary narrative. And that allows us, right from the beginning, within a couple of minutes in each of these shows, we've got amazing real people in real places doing the most extraordinary things to help protect whales, and in that case, sharks or marine life. And so the audience are getting, I would advocate, a much more inspiring contemporary experience, which gives you the wonder of the blue chip animals in their world, Steve getting you close, the authentic voice, but crucially, people are watching real people doing the most amazing things, which is where the inspiration comes. And we took sharks to COP26 up in the IMAX, up in Glasgow. That auditorium was full, and it was pretty much full with young and up-and-coming people who, to be fair, a lot of them had started the journey with Steve on Deadly 60 back in 2009. But it was so gratifying to see how those shows can then inspire people to make life choices about things that matter to them, that they value, and then they, in of themselves, are now out there on the conservation front line or working for, I'm sure, many organisations here to be a voice for nature and to take inspiration, take learning, and then take practical action to make the world for nature and ourselves better.
So is that what you set out to achieve when you're making nature? I'm really interested because I love watching nature films, nature programming, but sort of because I'm in this world, are you setting out to be able to convert people's minds into thinking this is something where I could see myself involved with this, making those conservation actions happen? Is that kind of, is that the intent?
For me personally, it's a conscious effort to get people to fall in love with nature. And I say that in the spirit of to build a meaningful relationship in their way, in their world, in whatever way that feels right for them. So it might be just to be somebody who talks about it, who gives it a value. But particularly I've made about 1,500 shows in about 30 odd years. Half of those have been for children, from preschool, CBBC, and to inspire young people. So I do feel, as a mum myself as well, the greatest potential is to inspire this next generation to build their relationship in their way from which they, as I've just said, in many cases choosing to kind of value nature, put a real value on it. They want it in their life as one of the top 5 things, maybe friends, family, football, hobbies, birthdays. But if nature's up there as well, then that has to be a massive aspiration. And just as one other example that we've made at True to Nature in the last 5 years, a series 1 Zoo 3, it's 3, I say young lads, late 20s, early 30s. They were born in their granddad's zoo, and they look after 800 endangered animals just in North London. But they are absolute ambassadors, leading the way, working with organisations around the world. And actually, Cam, the youngest, he was at COP26 as a TikTok ambassador, live streaming to about 270,000 like-minded people. And that ability on social media to share knowledge, and crucially, a series we did, a spin-off, OZT Goes Wild, 5 eps, putting the spotlight here in the UK on woodlands, forests, wetlands, coastal and urban. Each of those episodes, the boys were showcasing amazing people across the UK doing hands-on practical things, and a huge part of the audience now. I think that's where the magic happens, is when the individuals decided themselves to make their own activity in nature, whether it's walking, valuing it, doing things, planting seeds. That, I think, is where kind of the success is, the true success of a programme. It's the lasting legacy beyond the show. The show is the catalyst, is how I see the programming.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So we've heard some brilliant examples of where brands are engaging directly with the work that you're also passionate about. I'm wondering, and I'll throw this just open, see who's got the first thought on it. But I'm wondering if, in your experience, you've got any sort of knowledge to share on what the barriers might be that stop brands from either getting involved in the first place, or maybe getting that sort of deeper involvement along the way. So what are the barriers that you might see? Sort of, Alex, you want to come in?
I'm happy to. It's on now. Yeah, I'm happy to have a go. I think there's a couple of things on this. The first is that, from the brand's perspective, a lot of them have been getting their heads around carbon over the last few years, and like net zero and all of those commitments, starting to think about their scope 3 emissions and so on. And they've got a huge amount of new reporting requirements. And so, like, nature they know it's next, but like, they don't often have teams that are well-resourced enough to really get to grips with it. And I think Claire sitting here as part of a nature team from Lloyds is kind of amazing, and I would think something of an exception in the industry and the resources available. So I think there's something around that, like it's coming, but it's next, and it keeps getting bumped. The second thing would be that and people probably don't want to hear this, but nature projects are slow, they're uncertain, they are complicated, they're not necessarily familiar to businesses, and they're not very sexy. Like, it's quite a challenge often to kind of sell that in, when there are more simple campaigns that can be more easily sold. And I find that frustrating, but I think it's part of the reality that we have to accept, because if you don't accept that, you can't overcome it. And then the third thing is maybe that, and maybe Claire, you'd have a view on this, is like, businesses need a level playing field in order to take action on nature. They need to know that if they act, that their peers are going to be acting too, because they don't want their action to actually put them at a disadvantage. We have a climate and nature bill going, I think it was looked at in the House of Lords yesterday, is kind of going through, or might not go through at the moment, which would determine that we reverse biodiversity loss by 2030, right? If we can get something like that into law, and there's various businesses backing it, like the Co-op and Ecotricity and Arup and others, then that creates that level playing field. But we need that in order for businesses to say, okay, we know what our commitments are. We know that our peers and our sector has to act. Let's go.
Claire, you are nodding away. I'm going to see
Yeah,
if you've got something to add.
lots of things there. I mean, for one, yes, I agree on the sort of regulation point of view. The level playing field point of view definitely will help. It'll help us. It'll help all of our clients, all organisations, sort of embed it into their plans. I think the other thing that we found, and through the work with Projects for Nature, was there's a lot in terms of nature projects and nature restoration. There's a lot out there, but they're very localised, small projects, and it's how do you bring them together and make them something that is investable, and that is the big challenge. So for most businesses, donating to these projects is not something that they can do long term. So it needs to be commercial. And how do you make them commercial? And how do you link the supply and demand together? Projects of Nature have started that, but it's a donation-based model. But it's kind of thinking about what's the next step and how do you make that happen? Because investor confidence, I guess, is the big thing that we need to build on. That's partly where we see our role as well, building that investor confidence. For that we do need, ideally, the level playing field, and we need a mechanism of making it easy for people to understand what the commerciality is as well.
I don't know, Wendy, do you have anything to add on this, particularly from thinking about how you sell your content into broadcasters? Because to be able to make the programming that you work on must cost a lot of money, and therefore those broadcasters are probably looking for their return on investment in however they sort of articulate that to themselves. So I don't know if you think there's particular barriers that maybe broadcast media or other types of business see that maybe prevents them from getting on board with this kind of deeper nature communication.
I think one of the considerations, which we've got Futures for Wildlife here as well, in this industry is obviously, like we said, if we're filming around the world straight at the get-go, even with all the considerations that we scrutinise from the get-go, working wherever possible with in-country camera ops, looking to reduce our carbon, solar panels, single-use plastic, all the things. So every aspect of production behind the scenes now is heavily scrutinised for all the right reasons. So we are mindful of I always see it as a seesaw. Whatever you do, you're creating some impact, but what are the mitigations you can do in a responsible way to kind of put the balance more in favour of nature, I think is something which is, as the production company, we have to also challenge our broadcasters. Some are coming on board. Obviously, I've got True to Nature, partly backed by Sky, which is definitely the leading broadcaster when it comes to proactively pushing towards more positive nature initiatives. I'm always sensitive of using the word net zero and all that goes with that for obvious reasons, but nonetheless, it's moving in the right direction. Could we do more, quicker, faster? Yes. Do we want to get more momentum? Yes, we do. But there is a trade-off cost often, and therefore it's that trade-off between the costs associated with it, but also doing the right thing for nature and the long term as well. So it's getting the long-term view, but respecting that people largely want short-term gains.
Thank you. This is just your sort of 2-3 minute warning. I'm going to come out to questions shortly. First of those will be to those of you online. So hopefully you've already put some in there. Excellent. But before we do come to those questions, I've just got one very quick question for all of you, which is what sectors of business do you think need to get more involved in nature communication? Who's too quiet on this subject at the moment, and who do you want to hear more from around nature? Alex?
It's so hard to pick on someone.
Do it.
But it's almost always fashion. I feel like the fashion industry has so many problems, but also causes so much, causes huge amounts of impact. It's carbon. It's water, obviously, it's in the supply chain. I feel like the fashion industry, there are pockets that obviously that are doing things, but as a whole, given that I think it's heading towards 10% of global emissions through the fashion sector, textiles and fashion just don't get enough attention and don't do enough that's voluntary. And given how much money there is in that industry, and I know, again, a lot of it is struggling, but still, that's a sector that needs to raise its head above the parapet.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from anybody else?
Well, it's interesting in the world of natural history filmmaking, because, as you might appreciate, there's been a massive now shift. I think it was declared a week ago that more people are watching programmes on long form, that is as well, on YouTube versus Netflix. So as a result of that, those traditional natural history programmes I was talking about, we have an expression, the bubble has burst. They are expensive shows, but there's virtually nobody, very, very few market opportunities. So as filmmakers, hungry to get stories out there, we are having to think a lot more innovatively and imaginatively about who are our new content commercial partners who don't come from traditional broadcast and streaming. And I think in order to fund communications, and I think this is what makes this kind of event so timely and interesting, because I would say, sitting here 5 years' time, a classic business model will be a third of it is content creators who know how to capture images and craft stories, sitting alongside perhaps Lloyds Bank as a primary investor, alongside potentially, like you say, brands supported perhaps in fashion, who also have a vested interest, that just as we're sitting here, we've all got a vested interest in getting meaningful stories out there for both audiences, both here in the UK as well as globally, in a way that we still entertain, we inform, but the business modelling, and that's where the crunch sits, because there aren't yet established reliable business models such that if brands or business or individuals invest, if they're looking for a return on investment on content, those models are not yet developed, because if you're on a streaming platform like YouTube, those business models in terms of return on investment are still in their infancy in terms of being able to make meaningful projections. So I do think we're in a very interesting time where our worlds are colliding, because at the end of the day, every company has a marketing department, and that at its heart is getting stories out there. And how do we come together to make meaningful content, get stories out there, make a difference to nature, and inspire, crucially, the next generation to value the natural world of which they're a part.
Thanks. Claire, I'm sort of tempting you into saying banking here, but I don't know.
I was going to say, I can't really. No. I'm not going to pick on a sector, but what I would say is internally the way we're working is we're looking at what's most material, and that's what we're focusing on first. I'm not going to pick on a sector here to say who's not in this capacity anyway. You can ask me later.
I knew it would be an unfair question to you, so apologies for that. Right, we're coming out for questions here. We're going to go to online first, and then we're going to go woman, man in the room.
Okay, we have a question from Scarlett online. Can any of the panel give insight on how local governments can use collaboration and messaging to create or regain trust with constituents?
There's a question. I'm going to just fill a bit of space until somebody decides they want to answer this.
I feel I should have a go, because we work quite closely with local government. Trust is like a big issue overall at the moment. When we talk with households around the UK, we have a project, it's 180 households around the UK. We're talking to them about the kind of changes they might need to make in a net zero world. They don't trust anyone. In fact, they do. They trust one person. Any guesses? Oh, not bad. Martin Lewis. It's like Martin Lewis or bust. So it's actually a challenge, like generally that kind of that trust thing. I think that one of the things that councils can do, and maybe this is a bit of a workaround to this question, is councils have loads of capacity to enable community action. Like, they have access to land that they can make available and give support, which is not hugely expensive, to people who will take on that land, who will want to just do amazing things with it, whatever they need. They might need play areas, they might want to do a growing scheme and things like that. There are spaces, there are empty shops. Those empty shops can be given at without business rates. They can work with landlords to encourage like new community centres that are determined by the community what those things are used for. Councils have loads of levers that they can pull that aren't straight comms, that aren't straight leaflet through your letterbox, but they can enable so much. And I think if they can lean into that and find the people in communities who want to take action, who want to change things, because all communities have those people, find those people, ask them what they want and support them, councils can build a huge amount of trust and make a difference if they take that route.
Yeah, and I think, as many of you know here, we're very fortunate that we do have the Festival of Nature here in Bristol and in the southwest, and it's kind of so much great stuff happens during those couple of weeks, and it's how can we harness more of that. And I'm not saying initiatives aren't happening, they are, but it's kind of maintaining that momentum, so it's almost like it's happening all the time, so that it's on everyone's awareness, of which the council is inextricably linked, like you say, to creating spaces, opportunities linked to schools, whether it's sensory gardens, planting. I was the generation, which some of you might remember, plant a tree in 73. I was very disappointed, and I bought a tree. But I was disappointed we didn't have plant a tree in 23 for the next generation. But I do accept with the Avon planting of trees and other things, there's lots going on. But it's about all of us coming together more than we might have done, not just once or twice a year, but to have things that maintain, I think it's trust and the momentum. And like you say, it's not always easy, it does take time. So it's getting that kind of long-term strategy. But the beauty with nature, if you plant something and it grows, that is the best reward that can start to kind of fuel a passion towards action.
I was just going to add to that. I think also, and this is not a Lloyds perspective, just mine, but I think a lot of the things that happen in nature are so local that actually, even if Bristol Council tells us everything that's going on in Bristol, that isn't relevant to me. So it's almost, how do you break it down and make it smaller so we understand what's going on behind our roads? Or the small things like, using weed killer on streets, giving people decisions. So that's one of the things that I wrote into the council about, because I'm annoying like that. But, it's those sort of things, how you have to make it really local so it actually really means something to people, because even telling me what's happening in a school that's, miles away, it doesn't relate to me. So I think the locality piece is key.
Cool. We are running really short of time, but what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to take 2 questions from the audience, and if I can ask the panel to quickly address those. So there was a hand that I first spotted. This.
Oh, I wished I'd known about it and I would have shouted from the rooftops.
So for those of you who are online and didn't hear that, there was a heckle about grow a tree in 23 in response to this plant a tree. There was a question, I think, just in the hooped top there, and then the chap with the beard in the back there as well. So we'll take 2 questions.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lauren, I'm from Triodos Bank UK. My question was around, the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, and the UK banking sector has a big role to play in that. I guess my question was around collaboration, and how is Lloyds collaborating with other banks or financial institutions to reduce the impact that this industry is having on nature, but also to encourage consumers to make a better choice?
Cool. And if we just take this other question here, and then we'll address them both together, if that's okay. And I'm conscious that we're having everybody else is going to hear these the answers to these amazing questions as well. So please do come in.
Hi there. I asked a question this morning, and the answer was we're producing programs more aimed at the young people, and I've heard that answer again now. But majority of the power, political power, majority of the money, majority of voting intention is with the older people. Is there a danger of alienating the people who actually can make a change now, as opposed to the people who can make a change in 30 years' time?
2 brilliant questions there, and I think they're directed both at directly towards Clare and Wendy. So if I could ask you to take those maybe in that order.
Oh, right. So in terms of the way who we're working with as a bank, so we are part of a variety of initiatives, which you, did you say you're from Triodos? I think so, you're probably aware as well. So the SMI, we're part of the UK Green Buildings Council, can't even say it, WBCSD. So there's a variety of organisations where other banks, so our peers, but also from other countries come together and talk about how we can make a difference. So those are some of the ones I'd want to mention now.
Thanks, Claire. And Wendy, do you want to address that one about communicating with the power holders currently?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I guess as a filmmaker, I aspire to make a film for anyone who's 3 to 103, because it can relate to all of us. So whilst I said we have made a lot that have been commissioned, I think the very first Deadly 60, I hadn't made children's shows before that, so I made it for the average 35-year-old who'd watched Top Gear, took out the swearing, put a load of facts in. And I say that in all seriousness, and I mean that in the spirit of we should, as filmmakers, aspire to just make great content that doesn't, and it's not about alienating, like you say, the key decision makers. So I don't dumb down, I don't make it kidsy, I just make it hopefully really inspiring, really interesting, really fascinating, so that we can be sitting here on the sofa, adults, all ages can watch it and I hope take inspiration. So no, it is so important, you're not absolutely right. So making shows to reach people who have the power to change decision making and legacy is absolutely fundamental and crucial. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Your mention of Top Gear there just reminded me that we're speaking to you in the week that Jaguar took the Jaguar out of their brand, interestingly enough. But I failed in my one job as a chair, which is to finish on time. So thank you very much for your patience with us. It's been a really fascinating set of thoughts from our panel today. So just join me in thanking Wendy, Claire, and Alex, please.